Authority has always taken the stance of including recreational elements in the project. At this point, it's been pared down quite a bit as cost savings measures to try to make the finances work. Incidentally, we'll be having a finance committee meeting shortly, right after this meeting, that we're going to talk about the new financial plan. So if you have a chance to stick around for that, it may be very educational for yourself. As far as the recreational elements are concerned, because the channel portion is being constructed under a P3 arrangement with a private developer, we need to have the specifications of what we would like to see as a recreational element included in the bid for the P3. And we're anticipating to have some draft language to the developers by the end of December, which we would prefer to have some of that language in. So time is really of the essence when it comes to prescribing what we would like to see in recreational elements associated with the channel. I don't think it's insurmountable. I think we can come to some sort of agreement. The MetroCog plan is not going to be done in time for us to fully prescribe what they have in there. And we can really put whatever we want in as prescribed elements within for the proposers to propose on. But the difficult part comes with funding, what we would like to see there. And so I'm very encouraged. I would maybe propose that I would be the one that would work directly on this issue with you and with the State Parks Coordinator to come up with the elements we would like to see in the diversion channel, and also come up with a funding proposal that we can take to the legislature at the next session to maybe cover the gap of what those recreational elements are going to cost. Ideally, just for your information, if this was constructed by a private developer and those elements were included, they would also be included in the operation and maintenance for the next 30 years after the construction. So those maintenance costs would all be included in with the developer's proposed bid on this, which we may see some significant maintenance savings on recreational items that are included in there. But I think ultimately we need to come up with the prescribed elements we want to see in that plan relatively shortly, and then anticipate what that budget request would be from the state legislature in the next session.
Thank you. I do have some understanding of the finances, and it's really one of the reasons I come to you. I think it could be another resource. We spend a lot of money on state parks. None of it here. We have a lot of citizens here that are paying taxes. And I just encourage you to consider that there also could be a benefit financially if this was done correctly. And but I understand some aspects of the financing. I understand the MetroCog work and your work in terms of the recreation to some extent. And I'm just suggesting adding this, not changing any of your work, but adding this as a potential way of accomplishing the objectives you've already set out in terms of this project having a recreation component to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Appreciate your presence here today and your great suggestions, and Joel will take that forward. Okay, thank you so much. Well, I see I've got a big finance committee back there that's got their calculators all warmed up and ready to go. So is there any other business for the Land Management Committee? If not, a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Second. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Are we on live? Good afternoon, everyone. We will call the September Diversion Authority Finance Committee to order. Thank you for your attendance this afternoon. We'll take item 1A, roll call.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Here.
Mr. Costin? Ms. Johnson? Ms. McCall? Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Here.
Mr. Steen?
Here.
Mr. Gehrig? Mr. Redlinger?
Here.
Dr. Mahoney?
Here.
Mr. Grimberg?
Here. I was on the phone with Levi Bachmeyer driving here to the meeting this afternoon, and he wanted to give everyone his best wishes and said to say hi, so I'm following through with his request. He is transitioning to the West Fargo School District Business Finance Officer, as well as I still have a role with the diversion and working with the administration. So with that, approval of the minutes from the previous meeting, is there a motion?
So moved.
Discussion? Hearing no discussion, we'll roll or voice. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
The same sign, motion carries. Approval of the bills.
Move to approve.
For second,
Second.
discussion? Hearing none, we will take the roll.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson? Yes. Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Grimberg?
Aye. Item 4, I believe Mr. Montplaisir, you're leading that this afternoon on behalf of Mr. Costin?
Sure, on page 20, you have your standard financial report. 2019, we spent $40,524,517. Overall, we've spent, figures are kind of small here, $494,257,539. On the next page, on page 21, you have our balance sheet. We have just under $100 million in assets. 95 million of that's in cash. On the next page, you see the approved 2019 budget. It's 162 million. Of that, we've spent year-to-date 40,525,000, and we have outstanding encumbrances of 111,559,000. Now, a lot of those encumbrances will not be spent in 2019. If you look back a couple pages, like it starts on page 28, those are or page 27, those are all the approved contracts and what's liquidated, and you'll see like the Joint Water Resource District on the top of that page has an outstanding encumbrance of 56 million. That's going to be spent over a several-year period. So we have an unobligated balance right now of 10,640,000 for this year.
Questions for Mike? Hearing none, we'll take a motion to accept the report.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, we'll take the roll.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson? Yes. Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Grimberg?
Aye. Item 5, Joel, you're going to start us off? PMC report?
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention to everybody, in the future, I'll be doing the PMC report. We'll be renaming it the Executive Director report. For this month, I'm going to continue to have Kim just kind of finish it off. So, Kim, if you'd like to go. Thank you.
All right.
Well, maybe before you start, Kim, I don't know if the Finance Committee is, we're glad you're here.
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it.
Your first meeting, so.
It's good to be here, so.
I think I can speak on behalf of the Finance Committee and the entire Diversion Authority, so. Kim?
All righty. All right, the overall program status. The program estimate at completion in 2018 dollars stands at $2.75 billion. Actual cost to date as of July 31st, 2019 was $479 million, and leaving the program estimate to complete at $2.275 billion. The backup is included in your packet, and on the details, what you'll see, the red lines, this is so that we align the reporting with the information that comes from SunGard and Source. To report on the program revenues. Program revenues for the fiscal 2019 approved budget are also in the packet for a total of $162,723,850. The fiscal year 2019 cash budget, again, based on a fiscal year 2019 cash budget of $162 million. Fiscal year 2019 paid as of July 31st is $40,524,000, leaving a remaining budget of $122,199,000. Again, the details are in the packet. The red lines are to align with the information that comes from SunGard. All right. And just a quick update on the PMC task order status. This is something we're required to report out. We're currently under contract for task orders 4, 5, and 6. The total budgets are shown there, totaling $84,818,000. The anticipated budgets for 2019 in those task orders total $10,242,000, and spent to date as of July 26 is $1.67 million. This is a percentage spent on the 2019 budget of 32% for task order 4, 12% for task order 5, 0 reported in task order 6 because that wasn't yet fully executed as of July. Percent complete time is 55% on task order 4 is complete, 17% of task order 5 time has been spent, and then again 0% for task order 6. And that's it.
Questions for Kim? We'll take a motion to receive and file. We're into motions today.
Second. Oh, that was your motion?
No,
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Discussion? Hearing none, we'll take the roll.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney? He's gone. Mr. Grimberg?
Aye. Dr. Mahoney had parent-teacher conferences to go to. Item 6. Kim, are you going to continue?
Yep. All right, on the contracting actions, there are no diversion authority board approval contract actions that require recommendation by the Finance Committee, but there are some executive director approved contract actions that are for your information. Task Order 13, Amendment 21 for HMG for a total budget of adding $22,508. Task Order 17, Amendment 8, also for HMG for $54,376, and Task Order 30, Amendment 2 for HMG for $112,000. Cass County Joint Water Resource District approved contract actions. Again, this is for your information. 5 packages associated with more land appraisals. Those contract actions go to Integra, Compass, Patchen, Tinjum, and GE Bach. And that's it as far as contract actions.
Questions? Mr. Steen?
Thank you. This really has nothing to do with the issues you just followed or went over, but I think our last meeting, or could have been at the board meeting as well, we talked about these task orders, and I believe that we suggested that the HMG group should have a task order approved, as did, some of our other major vendors, and I'm not sure where we're at with that, or if we've actually given the direction to Joel, or who we need to give that direction to.
Joel?
So Commissioner Steen, are you referencing the master service agreement, or are you discussing the procedure for approval of task orders?
Well, I'm actually, because we've got our task orders from Jacob's group, we've said that the HMG is a significant contract, so we thought we should have a like task order approved by the Finance Committee and the board going forward. We have not had a
okay.
task order in the past.
Understandable. Yeah, I am aware of that issue, and I'll be looking into it.
I'm just curious to
Yep.
make sure it doesn't get
Yep.
lost in the
Lost in the
shuffle.
fray.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Kim. I'm going to turn over 7A and 7B to Mr. Paulson and Mr. Nicholson.
Thank you.
The meat of the meeting.
Thank you. I think I'll present from the podium with Martin. You know, okay. Yes. Sure. Okay, so I just wanted to mention on your agenda for 7A, the 2020 cash budget, that that'll be something that I'll be bringing to the committee at the next meeting. So let's get into the financial plan review. You're good to go. Just hit arrows first. Okay, thanks, Martin. So, Martin and I, wait, do we have John on the phone? Or John is on the phone. John Shockley is on the phone.
I'm here.
Okay, so if there's questions as we complete this financial review for John, well, he is available. So as part of the update to our financial plan, Martin, I, and John have put a lot of work into this. We've also been working with a few different committee members and keeping them up to date on the current status of the financial plan. So the presentation today is going to go over grant funding updates, the Diversion Authority near-term goals, the financial plan summary where we have all the meat of what we're looking at, and then closing comments and questions. So I'll start off with the federal funding update. If we all remember, the initial federal funding for the diversion project with the 2016 PPA was $450 million. In 2019, we had an amendment to the PPA, bringing us to $750 million. That increase in cost was associated with Plan B changes, and those are 2015 dollars. So when we take a look at that, as we move forward in time, those dollars will escalate per our PPA agreement. So what that means is the federal cash funds, as they escalate and as we've anticipated the expenditures, would equal approximately $900 million in the year of expenditure. The Minnesota funding update, right now the Moorhead and Clay counties have formed the Joint Powers Authority to acquire property rights pursuant to state funding for the project. I want to make a note here that $86 million has been requested for the diversion project related work. And of that $86 million, $7 million has already been secured in the first year of the request. So with that, kind of the breakup there, the city of Moorhead requested $40 million, and the Moorhead Clay County Joint Powers has requested the $46 million through the state legislature. One of the next steps here, we are going to be having the Senate Capital Investment Committee tour in early October. So we will be highlighting flood control as part of that tour and beginning our legislative lobbying with the Minnesota legislature. The North Dakota funding update, if you all recall, the 2019 legislative request was for $870 million in legislative intent and $250 million in low interest loans. And if everyone does recall, the legislative commitment to the project and intent was settled on at $750 million, creating a $120 million gap in our project funding, which we'll put that on hold for now. Martin will explain how we're addressing that in the financial plan in a few minutes. $437 million has been approved to date. Legislative intent to appropriate $313 million balance in 2021 through 2029 bienniums, and we'll show you how we've accounted for that in the financial plan in a few minutes. At this point, the legislature has directed us to secure P3 bids and formalize the state funding. So the intent here is that we will have the P3 bid in hand at the start of the next legislative session, and we will be able to show that those costs are locked in for the project and take out some of that ambiguity as far as cost controls are concerned. So the next steps, we will be preparing for the 2021 North Dakota legislative session and the funding requests. And I'll turn it over to Martin now, and he's going to go over the near-term goals and the meat of the financial review.
Okay, Chairman, excuse me, Chairman Grimberg, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Martin Nicholson, and I'm part of the PMC team that's been retained to assist with these kinds of activities. As Joel said, our near-term goals support a 2021 North Dakota funding request effort. And as he pointed out, when the Diversion Authority came out of the 2019 legislative session, there was some direction to do a few things that would help solidify future legislative requests. And all the actions that are in their near-term goals are consistent with that legislative direction. The first and foremost is to bid the P3 and lock in the costs. And I'll cover that in a little more detail later, but it is important to move from an estimate to actual bid prices for consideration of what the actual cost will be on the project. The third bullet is to designate costs for future North Dakota legislative funding. And as Joel pointed out, the gap in grant funding left a hole in the financial plan that we had to deal with, and so I'll go through how we've dealt with that in terms of an approach to allow us to go forward with the P3. And the last bullet is to pursue and obtain long-term loans. So I'll go through each one of those in sequence. And the first point is ring fencing the P3 financing allows the P3 procurement to move forward. And what does ring fencing mean, and why does it allow the P3 to move forward? It's really a identification of specific funds dedicated to the successful developers. And what that means is you give them first liens and first access to funding sources so we can demonstrate to them and to the rating agencies that sufficient funds will be available to pay the milestone and availability payments when they become due. So it's surety for the bidders that even though we came out of the legislative session light on grant funds, that gap does not apply to them and they're comfortable moving forward. This will be accomplished through the legal structure of the transaction, very similar to what the bond transactions are from a financial standpoint. So it's really a financial structuring instrument more than identifying specific funds. And because the Diversion Authority has specifically dedicated funds to the developer, the legislature will be asked to fund those designated costs at a later date. And those are those grant funds that we've been talking about in terms of the gap. So moving forward with the P3, what does that mean in terms of schedule? In 2019, we are re-engaging the P3 proposers. John has sent out a notification to the developers and the proposers. We are in the process of getting back in touch with them. We will get feedback from them on their ability to ramp back up and ability to meet the proposed schedules that we believe are consistent with this graph you see in front of you. So assuming they re-engage as we expect, the proposals would be due and those P3 costs locked in late 2020. And construction would start in 2021 in earnest. Channel construction would be complete in 2026, and that is when availability payments would begin, which are those payments to the developer for maintenance and for payment of their investment that they have made in constructing and building the project. At the bottom of the slide are the estimated milestone payments. Those are shown from 2022 through 2026. Excuse me. And that $763 million is an estimate in the financial plan for what we believe the authority's obligations are during the P3 construction period. So if you think about it, that is the down payment, that is the cash that the diversion authority would pay into the P3 project, and the developer would bring the balance of that, currently estimated around $400 million. So the bottom note is important. These payments are going to be bid, both in terms of when they're due and how much is due by our proposers. So that's one of the reasons it's important to bid the P3, understand what these milestone payments will be, understand what the costs are to develop a fairly certain request to go back to the legislature before the 2021 legislative session. The third component was to designate costs for the 2021 legislative intent request. And as noted, this is subject to change, and these are in 2018 dollars. So one selection was for the P3 alternative bid. There are 2 county bridges and some minor recreational elements, and I think Joel covered that previously in the previous meeting, that total about $20 million. And we have identified those as pieces of the project that could be funded outside the P3 developer availability payments, and therefore not subject to the financial plan. In terms of land acquisition, we've identified about $84 million worth of flowage easements where we would purchase options to lock in the future costs, and those costs would then be incurred in the out years of 24 to 26 after the legislative session has met and convened. This option, or this alternative of purchasing options, is also partially in response to conditions of the Minnesota permit. They prefer that we offer options as an alternative to out and out buying a flowage easement up front to landowners. So we believe it may be advantageous and preferred by some of the landowners. And as I said, we would exercise those options then in the out years in 2024 and 26. The last are in-town Fargo projects, about $16 million, and those are projects currently scheduled to be constructed in 25 and 26. They're primarily pump station reliability improvements and home buyouts. So that totals about $120 million of 2018 expenditures. It's important to note the bottom bullet, which is there's no change in what will be built, and there's no delay. We've not delayed the project final completion at all through this designation of funds. We've simply specified which projects we would like to apply those grant funds to once we get them from the state legislature in 2021. I see Mr. Grinberg leaning forward to his mic.
The no delay caught my attention. No delay based on what we've started earlier this year with our legislative plan and Plan B finance with the result of the governor's task force. No delays from that point.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. We have a planned project completion date in about 2026. None of these things change the strategy for getting that project done in 2026. The last was that we would pursue all available loan programs and financing tools, and we are pursuing those. And I'm going to turn this slide over to John that he's going to cover. He is in Washington, D.C. and has been meeting with the Corps on their WIFIA program. So, John, I'm assuming you're still on and can take it away.
Thank you, Martin. And as was noted on slide 5 by Martin and Joel, as part of our original legislative request, we had requested an additional funds from the state and a $250 million low-interest loan. As a result of the legislative session, we pursued different alternatives. That alternative was first the U.S. EPA WIFIA loan. That application has been submitted, and we are awaiting a response from U.S. EPA. We expect that response to be within the next week, couple of weeks to months. Also, as Martin had indicated, I've been having meetings with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers regarding their WIFIA program. Statutorily, Army Corps of Engineers was authorized to start a WIFIA program. EPA has had their program set up for approximately 3 years, and Corps is in the process of getting their rules ready for publication. We are also pursuing state revolving loan fund dollars under the clean water and drinking water programs, and those would be for the clean water elements of the project along with the drinking water elements of the project, primarily in the form of utilities that cross under either the southern embankment or the channel. We're also exploring the opportunity to utilize some of the SRF funds possibly for some stormwater elements. And as a final element, if and when state low-interest loans are available, we would also pursue those. So we have a lot of tools in our toolbox, and we're trying to chase down each of those loans to put together a package of low-cost capital that will help the project long-term. And I think Martin has the next slide.
Yes, John. At this point, we want to transition into a summary of the financial plan, kind of where we ended up after the actions that we've described on the previous slides. Okay, I was anticipating another question, Chairman Grinberg. I thought it would be helpful to do a short review of some slides you've seen before. These were first presented really back in 2012 when the project was getting rolling, that we have an iterative process and some tools that enable us to inform the funding and finance decisions that the Diversion Authority must make in pursuing a large project like this. So the first step, and we've had a lot of dialogue about that, is a cost-loaded schedule and a cost estimate. So really we take that $2.75 billion cost estimate in 2018 dollars, and we spread it over the project activities and the implementation logic that says, here's how we estimate the project will be built, and here's where the costs fall by month throughout completion. So that basically involved costs from today through 2026. We then take that and put it into a financial model which adds components that are not in a basic cost estimate but are important to finance a long-term multi-year project. And those being escalation of costs over years, interest rates to borrow the money necessary to build, what sources of revenue are available, and what can be counted on by rating agencies and bonding agencies that are willing to loan money against those sources, and then what are the costs of those financing, both short-term during construction and long-term during the payback of the long-term debt. So that's the process we go through to create an opinion really of where the costs lie and the obligations lie for the Diversion Authority. So it determines funding and financing needs to cover all Diversion Authority construction and short-term financing costs. So an important point about this slide, we're transitioning from a cost estimate to the obligations of the Diversion Authority that will be in front of this finance committee to write checks for. So these are the costs from July forward through the end of construction that the Diversion Authority must pay according to our current estimate and our current construction schedule. You might note that there are some bars out there that extend beyond construction, and that's because you have some short-term instruments to borrow money for construction that aren't paid off until 2029. They're part of your short-term debt, not long-term debt. And this slide is all about short-term and construction. So the costs on this slide, or I should say the cash uses by the Diversion Authority on this slide, total around $2 billion. The sum of all the year of expenditure costs that are on the slide. So the next question is, well, how do you raise the money to pay for those costs? You have funding sources through construction. We've talked about grant funds from the state of North Dakota and the state of Minnesota. You obviously have sales tax revenues, which are accrued each year. and you have public financing, both short and long term, that will be applied to these costs. So what does the finance plan say about where those sources are? They're paid using multiple sources, and while the colors are a little vivid at times, it starts on the bottom in green with sales tax, and the sales tax used during construction amounts to about $330 million. The SRF loan draws that John was talking about in the financial plan are around 50. We think those could go potentially as high as 100 million, but 50 million is what's in the finance plan at the moment. Short-term construction financing, usually in terms of improvement bonds, are around 350 million. You do have a cash balance in the bank that was reported that's growing. It's around 97 million at the current time. You have about 571 million of remaining State Water Commission and Minnesota funding intent that is distributed across how the 2019 legislature set forth the bienniums. So that number out there in 2027 and 2029 are the final installments of what the North Dakota legislature indicated they would like to do from an intent perspective. So I think that's 66.5 million and then 47 to close it out. And that's that amount out there in 2029. The finance plan includes long-term low-interest loan draws of around 510 million, and the designated grant funds that we had talked about earlier of around 120. And those are the crosshatched blue, which are shown in 2024, 2025, and 2026. Note the note on the top. This is obviously subject to change after receipt of the P3 bids, and this update in terms of a financial update will be done periodically as we look at bid prices that come in and current market conditions.
Martin, just verify that the designated grant funds would be the request at this time with 120 million during the North Dakota 2021 legislative session?
So that is the amount that we've included in the finance plan. That amount could be more, it could be less. It depends on what the bids come in and what our final look at the financial plan looks like after we get those exact costs.
True, thank you. But my question is, talk to us a little bit about 2021 appropriation and those funds not arriving till 2024 versus, you know, a lot of different angles could be played as far as requesting that sooner. What was the assumption you made by putting that into the 2024 or 2026?
I think the assumption was that we identified projects that were safely out far enough in the future that we didn't have to, if for some reason we were not successful in achieving the intent in 2021, we have sufficient time to raise those funds or find those funds elsewhere.
Gotcha, okay. For example, like the bridges, they wouldn't have been built.
Correct.
I mean,
correct.
During the 19 session, 21.
You're not going to build everything right up front, and the projects we identified are future projects, so that we weren't putting stress on the financial plan from saying, you know, we need some funds that we don't have a commitment for yet, and we're planning on spending them immediately in 21. So we moved those out further into the future. We selected projects further out in the future, I should say. Okay, that's one look. That was the construction look. And obviously you now have once you're through with construction, much like when you're done building your house and you get your mortgage set up, you have a long-term payment stream in order to be able to afford that house. So the financial plan also looks at funding and financing to cover both your developer costs during operations and your long-term debt service. So this graph is post-construction. At this point, you've converted short-term debt into long-term debt, hopefully long-term low-interest debt. And operations would begin sometime in 2026, given that the core projects are done and the channel is complete. And the first availability payments would begin paying back the contractor. Those are the bars shown in green. Those grow at a set rate every year by the contract, and they will bid those, as I said before, for what their initial payment is and then they're escalated per the project agreement. The dark blue bars are the sum of all of the debt service that remains after you've converted short-term debt to long-term debt and all of the instruments that you've used to pay for construction. So this particular financial run shows that debt being paid off in around 2061, so that the project, based on the runs in this financial plan, your debt is paid off in 2061.
Which is Joel's retirement year.
Hopefully.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the things I've been critical of is we have opportunities right now. The European Central Bank is now a negative interest rate, negative 0.5%. So, and this is not anywhere near a strength of mine. Is there any way to start converting the previous page expenditures into long-term debt sooner, less securing, I mean, arguably 1.5% interest rates into perpetuity, for sake of argument, right, perpetuity? Is there any way to secure this long-term debt much sooner in lieu of expending sales tax dollars right away?
I think that has been a subject of discussion in terms of when do, and if Kent were in the room, he's been an advocate of, at times, of doing just that, locking in low interest rates as soon as you possibly can. Due to the uncertainty we've had to this point with the project schedule and challenges, there hasn't been an opportunity to really look at a significant cost element to do that. With the P3 now moving forward and certainty around locking in probably around 70% of the remaining construction costs with that P3 bid, I think you will have an opportunity to revisit how you fund and finance that from a long-term perspective. And I heard John come off mute, so I think, John, you had a comment on that?
Yeah, great question. As part of the WIFIA program, once you have been approved with WIFIA, it's a drawdown loan, so you lock in that low interest rate. And so we are already exploring that through the use of WIFIA. SRF is the same. Once you have your application approved, it's a drawdown loan. So instead of having short-term borrowing costs, you just pull the money from the loan as you need it, rather than with a traditional bond structure of having a temporary bond issued that you have to refund with permanent financing at a later time. So that's why WIFIA is so powerful for the financial plan, both from a short-term interest rate perspective and a long-term interest rate perspective.
Thank you.
The other point I might mention is that because the P3 bidders are out after their own financing, taking advantage of low interest rates in the global market is something they will most certainly do, and lock that in when the P3 bids are obtained. So the earlier we can move this forward while interest rates are attractive helps both our P3 bidders and the Diversion Authority.
I've already told Mike Montplaisir I want to take all our loans from Europe right now and allow them to pay us to do things.
That would be nice.
Okay, so moving on, the final point on this slide is that annual payments are completely covered by the voter-approved sales taxes. There are no other sources of revenue that are counted on in the financial plan to pay the debt service and the annual availability payments. You might notice, if you're looking really close, that the green bars extend above the blue line, and the blue line is the sales tax revenues collected. And one great thing about WIFIA is that you can sculpt the payments such to match your ability to pay. You'll also notice that in 2026, 2027, and 2028, you collect more sales tax revenue than you're obligated to pay. And so what you collect in 26, 27, and 28 covers those small increments that are above the line in the remaining years in the graph. So what are the next steps? Next steps, we're obviously in the middle of pursuing long-term loans and confirmation of all the funding sources. We talked about quite a list of them that would support the Diversion Authority's ability to pay the bills. We will be providing updates to interested parties as requested and as appropriate. And Joel and I have talked about that, and we're happy to do so. We're receiving input from the P3 proposers as the procurement progresses, And as I said, we've reached out, and that process should be very informative over the next month or two. Obviously, we're going to continue to monitor short and long-term interest rates and general financial market conditions and all the things that go into the assumptions in the financial plan. The most significant next update is likely to occur at the North Dakota Water Topics Overview Committee meeting in September of 2020. I think you're all aware that they will be meeting here in Fargo, and they have asked for an update on the financial plan and where we are with the project. So that'll probably be the next public discussion unless there's a desire by this committee or the board to provide an additional update. And all of this really is around preparing and requesting funding during the 2021 North Dakota legislative session. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Joe for closing comments.
Thank you, Martin. And I think we can all see the power of the low-interest, long-term debt, especially the WIFIA program, is so integral to this project. And we hope to hear on that very shortly. So closing comments here, construction's ongoing. Contested case hearing in the Buffalo Red Watershed District process will be concluded before the next legislative session. So that'll take away some of the ambiguity on the Minnesota side. Part of that contested case is really holding up what sort of mitigative things that we need to do for the property owners on the Minnesota side. And some of that could have some cost ramifications. So once that gets wrapped up, we're going to have more clarity prior to the legislative session once more. Federal funding is secured subject to annual appropriations. That's going to be ongoing work that we have to ensure that those appropriations are meeting the Corps of Engineers' intent for their program. All signs kind of show that the Corps' sitting pretty good as far as that's concerned, but that's something that we'll be actively monitoring and keeping our finger on. The Minnesota funding process is underway with the legislature. The Diversion Authority does have our lobbyists in St. Paul that I've been coordinating with in preparation for the Minnesota legislative process as well. P3 costs will be locked in by the end of 2020, again, prior to the legislative session in North Dakota. And the funding request to complete the project will be made at the 2021 North Dakota legislative session. So at this time, we'll take any questions that anybody has in regards to the information that we provided.
Questions? Hearing none. Thank you. Nice work.
Thank you.
Mr. Dodds, are you next? As he proudly displays his Minnesota Twins logo. Two games left.
Magic numbers 2. Hope they clinch tonight. In your packet, I believe you have a land or property status report. I guess just real briefly, I think the number of acquired parcels now is up to 319 on that report, and so we're continuing to make progress. We have, from last month, if you have a good memory, you'll make note that there were some tan colored parcels on the south end of the channel last month, and this month now they're all blue, which means that we're in negotiations on nearly all of the parcels south of 94. There's just a small handful of appraisals that are still outstanding that we will be completing here later this month, early in October. So negotiations are ongoing. I guess we're sort of waiting for the first property owner to, flinch or agree with our appraised values as we work south of 94, continue to make progress on those negotiations. Also, I would point out we are getting ready to start appraisal work along the western tieback, which is the tan-colored portion of that map south and west of Horace, as well as getting ready to start appraisal work along the I-29 road raise project. So those will be 2 areas that we'll be getting going on acquisitions shortly. Happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Eric, maybe a comment or two on how you believe this is aligning with our budget and...
I feel like we're in good shape budget-wise. we have a pretty thorough budget on the land side. I feel like all the acquisitions to date have been within our budgeted range, and so feel pretty comfortable with that. As we look forward, we are maybe a little bit nervous about some of the farmsteads and rural residential properties that we'll need to acquire. We have a budget for all of those as well, but some of the farmsteads are large in scale, and some of the rural residential properties require some sort of complex relocation packages. So we've had some meetings recently on that topic, and I think it's something we're going to obviously continue to monitor. But generally speaking, I feel like we're in pretty good shape.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Steen?
Okay, one question that I heard come up at the Lands Committee meeting earlier today was one of the committee members had a concern about the cost of the easements and how they compare to the actual easements that have been achieved. Have you had a chance to go back and take a look at that?
Not yet, I haven't.
Okay.
I'm anticipating that those costs include the monuments that have been put in place on those sites, and so I just need to clarify that.
Thanks.
Commissioner Steen will also get you an answer on that as soon as we know. So.
Other questions? Next meeting's October 23rd. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
Hearing none, all those. Discussion, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye, opposed same sign. Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.